Welcome to the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center 2019 webinar series. My name is Rosemary Blizzard. I am the Business Manager and Communications Director for the RCVRC and will be your moderator for this webinar. Due to the large number of attendees, participants have been muted for this session to reduce audio interference. For better viewing, you may expand or minimize your menu control panel by clicking on the orange tab located on the left edge of the panel. If you have technical issues, please use the chat feature located at the bottom of your control panel to send us a message and we will try to assist you. Questions or comments related to the webinar may also be submitted using the chat feature. The webinar will be about an hour, followed by a brief question and answer period. Questions we are unable to address during this live session will be answered in a follow-up document, which we will email to attendees and also post along with a recording of this session on the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center website as soon as possible. For those of you who are not familiar with the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, we provide a compilation of best practices and firsthand experiences from jurisdictions that have used this method of voting with a focus on election administration. The website, rankedchoicevoting.org, and our other resources have been developed as educational tools for election administrators, policymakers, voters, candidates, and others. Today's presenters are George Gilbert, Keith Long, and Chris Hughes. For 25 years, George Gilbert served as Director of Elections for Guilford County, North Carolina. During his tenure, George administered over 65 elections, including 7 presidential elections. George is a nationally certified election registration administrator and has served on and co-chaired multiple committees tasked with improving election administration across the country. Keith Long works with the RCV Resource Center as a contractor and is the owner of Freedom Counts, LLC, an election consulting company. Chris Hughes is the Policy Director and Counsel for the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. He makes sure administrators, activists, and policymakers are speaking the same language when it comes to ranked choice voting, from legislative drafting through Election Day. He has worked on RCV legislation in more than a dozen states and has presented on RCV implementation to the Washington State Association of County Auditors, the Maryland General Assembly, and others. He also co-produces the RCVRC's podcast, RC Clips. You can follow him on Twitter at @ThisChrisHughes. Chris is admitted to practice law in the state of New York. With that, I will send it over to George Gilbert to get started.
George, you might still be muted.
Chris, you are right. Good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be in your time zone. Rosemary, I wanted to mention it appears there are a few people that are having trouble getting on. You might want to see what issues they're having.
I will take care of it.
In the meantime, we shall begin, and hopefully everybody will be able to get in. When Gary Bartlett and I contracted with FairVote for the initial RCV study back in 2015, probably the most significant thing that we found was that ranked choice voting was simply not integrated, not well integrated, certainly, into voting systems. And this kept interested jurisdictions from either adopting or being able to implement RCV, even when they had already adopted it. They simply didn't have the necessary equipment to run or at least to tabulate RCV elections. Actually, Gary and I already knew this because we had learned this lesson in 2010 when North Carolina faced the first statewide RCV election in the United States in several decades. We knew we could hand count the optical scan ballots relatively efficiently. However, in North Carolina, 40% of the state vote was going to be cast on DRE equipment. And while this equipment produced a digitized cast vote record, no tabulation software existed. I personally thought we were headed for a train wreck, but Gary said we can do this. And to make a long story short, he did. The state created a tabulation algorithm in Excel, and it worked very efficiently. Even so, we knew that what was needed was a tool built to VVSG standards and capable of integrating data from multiple voting systems. Nevertheless, for the first year of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, that is 2016, 16 or 17, can't remember. Nevertheless, we made very little progress toward that goal. But a breakthrough finally came in the spring of 2017 when Rob Ritchie of FairVote introduced us to a group of friends in San Francisco calling themselves Bright Spots. Bright Spots is a multi-talented group which includes, among other skills, some very capable software engineers. Specifically, my dog's barking here. I got to get her out. Louis Eisenberg, John Moldover, and Hilton Edenfield were the three primary engineers that have worked with us on this system representing Bright Spots. They wanted to use their talents to make a positive contribution to improving the democratic process. Not knowing what they were getting into, of course, initially Louis and John agreed to take on the task of developing, in their free time, a free open source ranked choice voting tabulator. As it turned out, Chris Hughes and I had just begun working with NIST on developing the new voting system standards for the EAC, that is the VVSG version 2.0 standards. So this put us in a position of working with a team of election experts to define the standards appropriate to the various forms of ranked choice voting, and then to pass these requirements on to the Bright Spots development team. So we spent the next 2 years developing and testing the tabulator with cooperation and some guidance from ES&S. This summer, we were finally ready to submit it for formal testing by an EAC-approved voting systems testing lab, that is a VSTL or VSTL, as many of you know it as. And again, in cooperation with ES&S, we submitted the module to ProVNV of Huntsville, Alabama. ProVNV completed its testing and issued a letter of compliance on August 30th, 2019. Now, in a nutshell, what this compliance test results was that based on the testing performed and the results obtained, the Universal RCV Tabulator solution identified in this letter is believed to meet the requirements set forth by VVSG 1.0. And the letter goes on to talk about the Universal Tabulator as a source code modification of a VVSG 1.0 certified system. And what this refers to is the fact that the tabulator was submitted to the VSTL as a modification of ES&S's EAC certified EVS software. Consequently, the letter of compliance applies to the use of the Universal RCV Tabulator in conjunction with cast vote records from ES&S's EVS software. Now, this was largely the result of the fact that Minneapolis used this system, and that made RCV cast vote records readily available for our developers to work with. It has been said that the label Universal RCV Tabulator is somewhat of a misnomer, and as you see at this point, it is only certified or has only been tested for use in conjunction with the EVS software. But I would mention in our defense that IBM was not international when they began their work. So we do have all of the rules that govern ranked choice voting elections in the United States incorporated into the tabulator. And we are prepared to work with any jurisdiction and any voting system vendor to replicate this compliance testing for other voting systems that produce a digital cast vote record. Before I leave this topic of our history, I want to give special thanks and credit to Keith Long of Freedom Counts who shepherded the tabulator through the testing process and developed most of the documentation. So with that introduction, I'll turn the presentation over to Keith to show you how you can securely obtain the tested version of the Universal RCV Tabulator version 1.0.1.
Thank you, George. First of all, yes, that's not a misprint. This is free. All the software, the documentation necessary to start playing around and seeing if you like this concept of tabulation. And so we're going to, today, I'm going to walk you through what you could expect if you were going to download it. And at the end of my presentation, I'll actually go down and download some and you can see it, how easy it is. As George mentioned, and this is really important, hope all of you who are not using ES&S are not discouraged. We have reached out to the other major vendors. Today I was working with the HART data, cast vote records. I have Dominion. That's a lot more difficult as it exists today. I just might need some help with that one. And we've reached out to the others also. So as we get those, and since the software itself is certified, all we will have to do is format the cast vote records, take it back to the test lab, and let them confirm that we're still getting accurate votes without hopefully tampering the code. Now, shareware, real quick, like why is it free? Shareware is developed by a group of collaborative public manner type people who are interested, as George mentioned, in perpetuating democracy or whatever their interest is in developing software. But open source software is exactly what it means. It is open to the general public. And that means election officials, it means advocacy groups, it means anybody, candidates, anybody can get the software and actually look at the source code and play with it. Now, that's a good thing for keeping good faith, but for running elections, as we all know, security is number one today. You got to have things secure. So as I'm going to show you how to do this, if you're going to download this software for the purpose of tabulating an RCV election, you will want to be sure to read the installation instructions that I've included in the documentation about security. And the most important one would be you wouldn't just go to your desk and go on the internet and download it. You would want to be sure that the computer you are going to use is disconnected from the internet and disconnected from a network. So it'll be standalone, actually isolated. But that only applies if you're going to run an election. So before you ever run an election, you're going to practice, you're going to get really good at running the software. And so you can download that and play all you want. But just remember, when you're ready for an election, you want to download it one more time and get a nice clean copy and then validate it. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, the tabulator does run on all three of the major operating systems. Most of you will be on Microsoft Windows. And I'm going to show Microsoft Windows today. Anybody that's a Mac fan, Apple, it also is supported. And then the Linux, which is more like an open source operating system for developers, we've fixed it so it works with that system too. There are certain procedures that are specific to the operating system. So it's important that when you do load it down, that you follow the instructions for the correct operating system. Okay, so the link is right in the middle of your screen. It's GitHub. GitHub is a site where most open source software is located. It's the major one. Bright Spots has a folder area there, and you can see that it goes out and gets version 1.01. Now, If there is a change to the software, maybe there was a major modification or somebody needed and we had to go open that up, that number will automatically be advanced when we recompile the code. So that means that that number would move to the next available number, 0.2 in this case. It also means that hash codes and other things that are involved will no longer match. So it's going to be important if you do download this and you're going to use an election, that you let us know that you have it, because if we get an update, you probably wouldn't go out there to look for it. We'd have to send you some kind of notification. So that's just kind of a heads up down the road. So when you do log in, and this is what we're going to see when I log in at the end, we're going to see 10 files. Real quickly, the certification letter that George mentioned from ProVNV is attached. If you need that, it's a PDF file. You can download it, print it out, and distribute it as necessary. All the documentation, there's about 24 or 25 documents in the zip file in 4 different folders. Again, you're going to want to get to the ones that apply to your operating system. Then there is the 2 Linux folders, the 2 OS X, which is the Mac, and then the 2 Windows. The Windows zip is the one that holds the compiled program and all the utilities that support it, test elections, etc. So that is the actual package that you can download and do some test runs. The other one is the SHA 512 on the end of it. That is the hash code. Now, I'm going to just touch on the hash codes in next slide, but I want to finish these other 2 here. The source code and the Java files are more for programmers, people out there that want to take this program and maybe try to improve it, maybe try to modify it for their own use. It's all fair. All the rights to this software are transmitted to whoever downloads it, so they can resell it. They can do whatever they want with it. The only exception is if you're going to run an election, you have to run the one that your state has approved. Okay, next slide. All right, so if you're going to download, as I mentioned, all 3 systems have 3 files. We're going to do the Windows one. So I'm going to download the documentation, the Windows zip, and the hash code. You download all 3 at one time, and they'll go automatically to your download folder. If you want to get the letter, you want to add it also, so you maybe have 4 files. Once they're downloaded, they'll look similar to the slide there. You'll see that there's 2 of them are zip files and one's that hash code file. So if you're going to run an election and you have it on a computer other than the one that you have isolated, you'll have to download those to a portable thumb drive and then transmit them over to the other computer and upload them. Okay, next slide. All right, prior to unzipping the Universal Tabulator, the one with all the programs in it, you need to validate that it's the same program that the test lab has certified for use. And the way they do that is they simply run a hash, which is an alphanumeric or a binary code that is generated against some software. If you change one thing in the file, for instance, if I ran it on that documentation file and I went in and corrected a misspelled word, and I went back and ran the hash code, it would not be the same hash code that it had before I changed it. So it's a long series of numbers. They're listed there down at the bottom. So you want to do that one time when you're getting ready for an election, put it on your computer, save the download file. So if there's a test of your capability to run an election and someone says you tampered with it, well, you can pull out that file, show them it had the right hash code. Hash codes, are a long series of alpha characters and numeric characters, and you can see the two. I put the one that was generated by the Vistal, and the other was the one I generated, and then I put them in Word and put them side by side so I could look at them. And that's how long they are. Any one of those numbers changes means somebody tampered with something inside there. Okay, with that, I'm going to take control and show you a quick download. At the end of that, I'll come back to the slides. That was a series of mirrors to see if you were paying attention. Okay, so I have up here at the top of my Google page a link to the download folder. And you'll see here I'm now on, if you look up here, I'm on GitHub, Bright Spots. This is their website. And this is where they've posted those 10 files I mentioned. Also, as we post changes, whether to certification letter, to the documentation, or if we add something, and down the road, if we change the software, we make a change log here. So this will tell you the last two changes, and that's why it's 1.0.1 and not 0.0. We had a last minute change. So I'm going to read down. Okay, I said we needed documentation. You just click it. I'm actually using a Mac today, so I just click once. Windows, you'll have to click and then say save at the bottom. I think most of you have probably done that with downloaded software. I'm going to go down and get the bigger file, which is the Windows zip file, just by clicking it, and I can watch it downloading. It takes a little bit longer. It says I still have to talk for 30 seconds. Well, the last one I'm going to do will be this hash code. SHA is one of the more robust hash codes. There are a lot of different hash coding software out there, and they all have the capability of running maybe 30 or 40 different kinds. We were recommended, Bright Spots recommended, and the Vistal agreed that the SHA 512 is currently the most accepted version for this application. So I've just about got the other one downloaded, and now I'll download the small one. It should just take a second here. I think we got them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get off that, and I'm going to try to remember what I'm doing here. I'm going to say I want to go see that file. So just a second here. I want to go show you that I got them. Okay, here's basically what a Mac looks like when it's doing the Explorer on Windows. And there's the 3 files I downloaded. And over here, you'll see it says 121, 122 today. So that shows that these are the 3. I'm just going to quickly click on this one file. See if I can get it to come open. Doesn't want to come open, I guess. I wanted to show you what was inside, but it's not important. When you get it, you'll be able to. It just comes up in a Word document, so I guess that's not going to work today. Okay, so I'm going to get out of there, and I'm going to stop sharing. And we're back to the slides. Okay, so with that, I thank you for being attentive. As they said, if you have any questions about the download or the hash codes, I'll stay on for the question and answer. And the next presenter is Chris Hughes. He's going to show you a little demonstration on how it works. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. So hi, I'm Chris Hughes. I'm going to show you a demo of the tabulator, the thing I'm sure you're all here for. So let me take over screen control. I'm going to show my entire screen to start, and then I'm going to start showing just the tabulator. And there again is our fun mirror effect. So I'm going to start just by showing you how to open the tabulator. Then I'll do a quick walkthrough of what it's like to use the tabulator, talk a bit about how I learned to use it, and then pass it back off to George. So when you're running the tabulator, the first thing you want to do, you just got to open the folder. When you unzip it in your operating system, you'll get a folder called RCV. I've kept it on my desktop just so it's easily accessible. And once you open the RCV folder, you want to go into the bin folder, bin. For Mac and Linux, you'll double-click on the file called RCV, which I've highlighted here. To open the tabulator for Windows, you'll double-click on rcv.bat. So with that, I'm going to open the tabulator. On Mac, the first thing that pops up is this terminal window, which then launches the tabulator itself. So I'm going to take a second and switch over to just showing the tabulator, so that's a little clearer for all of you. All right, so this is the tabulator. I think you can see my cursor as well, which is good. So this is the home screen of the tabulator. There's three major things to see here. The left 2/3 of the main part is where you put in all the different configuration options. So on this tab, the output tab, you'll put in the contest name, which is required, which is why it has that asterisk. And then any other information about the election that you want. You can select your output directory where the results of the election will get stored once the tabulator runs, contest date, jurisdiction, so where you are, that sort of thing. On the right here is really extensive documentation explaining what each option in the tabulator does, what it means, what its impact on how the tabulation is run. So if you ever do have any questions about what it is you're filling out in the tabulator, this is a really good place to go to find an answer for your question. It's a very long scrolling thing, so it might take you a little while to find the answer. So we also have included this as an individual file in the documentation that Keith mentioned. Then finally, at the bottom, we have the console, which shows essentially what the tabulator is doing at any given moment. So the first thing that happened is the tabulator GUI, the graphical user interface, was opened, and then it finished launching. So it says, welcome to the tabulator. And any other thing that I do that I tell the tabulator to operate on will then also be logged in this console. And we'll see how that works in just a second. So with that said, I'm going to load a configuration file that I've pre-made for this, this demo from my webinar demo folder. I'm opening the Minneapolis Parks JSON file. JSON is just the file format we've used for all of our configuration files. So as you can see, all these different options got populated because this configuration file was already built. It's the Minneapolis Parks Board election from November 7th, 2017. So that's the output. I already walked through the output tab. I'm just going to walk through the other three tabs and then show you how to run an election using the tabulator and briefly display some of the results files that you get out. So the second tab in the tabulator is the CVR files tab, which is where you tell the tabulator where to find the cast vote records, the digital record of your election that it will use to actually determine the results of your ranked choice voting election. In this case, I've already pointed the tabulator towards the file path I want. It's the Park at Large CVR from 2017. The next tab is the Candidates tab. It's very straightforward here. I've put in all of the different names of the candidates who ran in this race in 2017. It's very easy to add another candidate. Say I wanted to add myself as a candidate. I just type in my name here in the candidate name field. I'll do that one more time and click add. Very simple. I can't leave my name in here though. The tabulator will get confused. So I'm going to say delete selected. So if you ever do make a mistake while inputting a candidate name, it's very easy to just delete their name and add a new one, or even edit it. And then finally, the Rules tab. This is the meat of the tabulator. As George mentioned earlier, the tabulator can run practically any ranked choice voting rule currently in place in the United States. I did see a question that got submitted about whether we've included Cambridge. We actually have not included the Cambridge whole ballot transfer method of ranked choice voting. We've included every other ranked choice voting method, single winner and multi-winner, as well as two smaller forms, two variations on ranked choice voting that are very particular. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but we have included every form of ranked choice voting in place in the United States, except for the Cambridge whole ballot transfer. But as you, getting back to the Rules tab itself, as you can see, there's a lot of options on this tab, and the way you fill this out depends entirely on the election you're running and the rules in place in your jurisdiction. As you can see, you can customize your overvote rule, what happens when you run into a vote where a candidate has ranked multiple candidates at the same place. You can customize what happens at skipped ranks. There's a lot of customizability here, and it's meant to be as flexible as possible to meet the requirements in place in any jurisdiction that is adopting ranked choice voting. So that's a basic walkthrough of the tabulator. If people do have questions, I'm happy to answer more. If you want to get on, one-on-one and talk about what using the tabulator in your jurisdiction might look like, we're happy to do that as well. Just please reach out after this. We'll have our contact information at the end. So with that said, I'm going to run a tabulation. Because my config file is already built, I don't need to fill out anything else. All I'm going to do is first validate, which validates my configuration file, make sure I've filled out all of the different fields that I need to in order for the tabulator to be able to use my configuration file. So I'll click validate. And it turns out, can't find my cast vote record because I actually moved the file. So let me fix that. And as you can see, that showed up in the console. Let's see, where did I put it? Give me 1 second. I'm just going to find the file. Need to make sure that I delete the right one. Oh no. Sorry everyone, I somehow deleted this file from the folder I was planning on using. But anyway, I've now fixed that problem. I'm going to validate one more time and make sure that my configuration is properly valid or configured. And here it is. My validation was successful. So I can run my tabulation. So with that done, I'm actually going to save the configuration first, just so that everything is in place, and then I will tabulate my election. And as you can see, as this tabulation happens, you get updates in the console as the tabulator reads the configuration file and then reads all of the cast vote record file and confirms that all the candidates are like properly inputted into the configuration. All right, so I've now completed tabulation. I see here the results were written to my Universal Tabulator file or folder. So let me share my whole screen again so you can see all the stuff I have up. So here's all the different things I had to open while we were running this. Here's my Universal RCV Tabulator file or folder. I'm going to organize by date so I can find these three new files that were just created by the tabulator. The 3 files that the tabulator creates every time it runs are a summary CSV, which I don't want to open in numbers. I want to open in Excel. The summary CSV is the simplest representation of the results of the election. It's just a round by round. That is the wrong thing. There we go. I have a couple things I need to close now. So this is the summary file, the very basic representation of results of a ranked choice voting election produced by the Universal RCV Tabulator. As you can see, each round has its own column and shows whether a candidate was eliminated or elected. In this case, candidates were eliminated through round 7, and then finally in round 8, a candidate exceeded the threshold and won election. There's a lot of information included in this. I'm not going to talk about all of it, but it is just a very basic summary of the election. It is also a CSV, a comma-separated value file. If you wanted to make any edits, to add color, or to highlight certain aspects of this election, you'd have to save it as an Excel file, but that's entirely possible to do. The other two files I'm going to show very briefly. One is the summary JSON file, which is the same information as included in this CSV, but is meant to work with our online visualizer that we've been developing that George is going to walk you through in just a couple minutes. Then finally, we have the audit log, which is a representation of what happens to every single ballot in every round of the election. So if you're auditing and you want to know how a specific ballot was handled by the tabulator in a particular round, you can find it in this file. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it back to George.
Thank you, Chris. Chris just showed you the CSV formatted results file for the Minneapolis Park Board. And he mentioned that you could dress it up a little bit and save it to Excel, which I have done here. Just provide colors for the winners. I put the total number of ballots down at the bottom so that you could see there's a verification that all of the ballots have been accounted for. This is just a real simple way for you to generate a results report that you can either display for the public or you can print out or share in whatever form you want to. It's just a basic Excel file. But most people, most jurisdictions today are looking for something a little bit more appealing, and we, among others, are working on this effort. My next slide, I provide links, and these will all be in the links documents that we provide. We will provide at the end of this and in the webinar that we post later. So you'll be able to download a document that has these links on it as well as the link to the tabulator. But I just want to very briefly run over give you some examples of the kinds of things that we are working on. Due to the time constraints, I'm only going to show you briefly what some of the examples. I'm going to screen share here, and let's pick that. And let's look. We have just gotten certified for use by the city of East Point in Macomb County, Michigan. So the visualizer that our team of developers is working on is what we're seeing right now on the screen. The interactive bar chart allows you to go round by round and display what has taken place in each round. In this case, we eliminated the write-in candidates and redistributed those. They all went to Harvey Curley. In round 3, Harvey Curley surplus ballots are redistributed. In round 4, we eliminated Sarah Lucy. We obviously need to increase the font size on this, but that's some of the things that we're working on now. And in round 5, let me see if I can get this to, there we go. We redistributed that surplus. We ended up in this particular election, there will be 2 winners. And as you can see, these first 2 candidates listed here. We have other visualizations that we're working on just sort of as examples of the kind of things that are possible. I know Minneapolis also has a Zanke visualization. For those of you not familiar with them, it shows where the votes are going from each candidate that's eliminated. But I would like for you, after we get through here, and once you get a copy of these links, go in and play with these visualizers and give us feedback. We want to get some feedback, particularly from those of you who are election administrators, but everyone is certainly welcome to participate. Look at the various styles of presentation that we are working on and give us your ideas on what you think is the most effective and the clearest way. One thing that we like that Minneapolis has done is the way that they have presented their bar chart, and that's what we're looking at right now. Like ours, I don't know what that means. There we go. This is their mayoral election from 2017, and as you can see, they show the number of votes that each candidate obtains, and in each round, they show the number of votes that are transferred from the eliminated candidates to the continuing candidates. I'm going to talk to my development team about copying the folks in Minneapolis, which they have given us permission to do, obviously. So these are some of the things that we are looking at, and obviously the Bright Spots visualizer that I showed you first will eventually be integrated with the Universal RCV Tabulator, so that those will become part of one package, really. For more information on the Minneapolis and the Veritas system, let me turn off screen share here so we go back to the screen there. The Veritas Consulting Services, Lee Valentine gave me permission to share this YouTube video with you guys. This is a system that he has developed. It is a bar chart system that is very dynamic, more sophisticated than anything that we have worked on or that Minneapolis has done. And if you have questions about that, please feel free to contact Lee. He would be happy to talk to you about it. Now, the next thing that we are looking at is additional CVRs from other vendors. As I mentioned at the beginning, we would be happy to work, we intend for this Universal Tabulator to work with all of the voting systems for which it's needed. But in order for that to happen, the cast vote record generated by your voting system has to be converted to a format that's readable by the tabulator. To date, as I've noted, we have only converted the ES&S cast vote records from their 5.0 through 6.0.4 versions. We are also capable of inputting and outputting common data format files that will be forthcoming in the VBSG 2.0. So when VBSG 2.0 comes out, the Universal, and people start meeting that standard, the Universal Tabulator will work with almost any system because we already can read those common data format files. Also, as I mentioned, we are committed to making every attempt to implement the data conversions for any voting system that you're using that generates a digital cast vote record. And for that, I mean both legacy systems and new voting systems. So with that, I will be happy to hand this back over to to Rosemary. I keep saying Kieran. Sorry about that, Rosemary. And she will take us through our conclusions, and then we'll get to some questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, George. No worries on the misnomer. I have been called worse many times before, so that's actually a compliment to be called Karen. Before we get started with a few questions and comments that we've had, just wanted to share with you the contact us information if you need to contact us later. We have about 10 minutes out of respect for your time. We wanted to keep the session to about an hour. If there are questions or comments that we do not get to, we will get answers for those questions and put them in a document that will be part of the post-webinar package. With that, we'll start with our questions. Hold on, I'm pushing the wrong button. Again, a lot of you have already used the chat feature, question feature at the bottom of your panel, so we appreciate that. I do want to take the opportunity. I noticed as the webinar was going on that we had a couple of questions asked and answered by our attendees. That just is a testament to how great the RCV community is and how well they work together in sharing information. So good job. The first question that we'll get started with is, and I believe it may have already been sort of answered, but we'll cover it as well. I think this will be for George or Keith. You know, the issue on which voting systems we are ready to go with and which voting systems we still need to work with. Is there any sort of outlook on how, or timeline on how that will take place?
Keith, I'll let you address that if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're still gathering information. We need clear ballot, and I did reach out to one of the people I knew there, and they're in the process of trying to get me some records. But if you are a clear ballot user and have data, cast vote records that you can share, if you'll send it to one of us, that would be grateful for that. And the other one is the Unison system. I don't know where we are with them. But again, if you're a user or know somebody there that's run an election and might have some cast vote records, or somebody that's posted them. I know some jurisdictions post their cast vote records. I know for sure that one in New Mexico did, because I went and got some of the Dominion. Dominion's really tough because they have a lot of different files instead of one general file. And then I'm looking at Hart today, so I did get some Hart ones. So those are the four major ones. Timeline-wise, well, as soon as we get a couple of them, so we can get the cast vote records and test them, and we'll probably need the bright spots to help write some software to do that. We'll take the tested ones that we're confident and take them to the VSTL and get them to test and give us another letter for those vendors. Now, the problem we're up against now, as most of you are that's in the election business, we're about a month away from off-year elections. Just because it's an off year, an odd year, doesn't mean there's no election. So a lot of you are busy, and I know the vendors are busy, and they've been pushing us back. So I'm going to guess that we're not going to get anything of any value till early next year. But as soon as we get the data and can massage it and test it and get it down to VSTL, it should not take long, because I do not think we're going to open the software to modifications. We're just going to validate that it handles the cast vote records in the same format. So hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Keith. Move on, and I think this one will probably go to Chris. Is this for just single winner elections, or is there an upper limit on the number of candidates or the number of ratings per ballot?
So I don't believe there's any sort of technical limitation on the number of rankings or the number of candidates from our software. I know, and Keith, please correct me if I'm wrong, I know when we were working with ProV&V on the certification test, or the conformance test, we were working with ES&S data that had up to 88 candidates, and I think it was 27 total rankings at most. So we can at least work with those totals of candidates, though I hope no election administrator has to deal with 88 different candidates in an election, ranked choice voting, or otherwise.
Well, Chris, it wasn't too long ago that California had a governor's race like that. Just about the same. But the limitation, by the way, is not the software, it's the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
The length of the ballot, and of course, most of the vendors that use some form of optical scan ballot now, they have 17-inch ballots, maybe a 21 or 22-inch. And that the number of races or candidates you can get on a ballot, because we have to print on the ballot too, is what's the limiting factor. So they have to submit to us the limits of their system, and that's, they know what it is. So
basically, we can tabulate as many candidates and as many selections as your voting system can accommodate.
Okay.
The simplest answer. And I didn't answer the single winner portion. I tried to cover it during the webinar, but it can handle single and multi-winner ranked choice voting.
Okay. Awesome. Are there any demo config files available that would be available to individuals who wanted to sort of work with the tabulator before putting it to actual use?
Yes, we can make some of those available, and what we will do for that purpose is we will add those to the links documents when we post this webinar on our website, and you will be able to go to it. If you want to get them before that, if you've already downloaded and you want to get those before that, this is George, by the way, feel free to contact me, and I will be happy to provide you with config documents and cast vote record documents that you can use for playing around and learning and testing.
I just might add, George, that there are some in the package.
Right.
When you open the RCV, the one that had the hash codes on it, it will have, I think it's 4 or 5 test databases in there for fool around, and that's a good start.
Yep.
Okay. The questions are coming in quite well, so give me just a second to take a look at those. I think we've answered that one about the CRV file being available for testing. Just a question, I think it's tongue-in-cheek, can you get CRV from Cambridge and show them a better way? If nothing else, 30 candidates would demonstrate the capabilities. So maybe down the road we'll be able to factor those rules in. And to clarify, there were 135 candidates in that recall election. Good gracious. Chris, do you see any other questions in the chat that we could cover in the 2 minutes we have left? Again,
Yeah.
we will expand our document with any questions we don't get to.
I think we actually have 7 minutes, right? Because we're going until 2. Because we
Yeah.
started 5 minutes early.
I am so sorry. I'm watching that clock at the top.
Yeah,
Please
I know
forgive me.
it's misleading.
It is. I'm sorry.
No
Let's
worries.
see.
So we actually, I guess, Keith, you covered this. We got a question about Hart's CVR, just asking if we see possibility with Hart's system. And I guess really the answer there is it remains to be seen. After Keith works on it, we'll have a better sense. Is that right?
Yeah, it depends on what version of software, because some of the older ones, I know I installed Oklahoma's optical scan, and they don't create a cast vote record that we can use. But if you're using the eSlate or something that they've invented and distributed since I worked for them, if you can get some cast vote records, we'll be glad to take a look at them. Love to. Thank you.
I would also mention that if anybody wants to play around with cast vote records, Minneapolis has published all of theirs on their website, and the state of Maine has published theirs on their website. So that is 2 jurisdictions that use the ES&S system that is already compatible with our tabulator. And all you have to do is, I mean, that's sort of the default that is accepted by the tabulator right now. So if you get tired of playing around with little test files, you can go out there and grab one of those and see if you can replicate their results. We have done so.
Yeah, I was going to add, because one of the first things that blew me away when I tested this system a few months ago is that folder that Chris ran, 106,000 cast vote records in less than 30 seconds. And I was flashing back to all the hours I stood election night waiting for results. Would have liked to have that speed back then.
We all would have, Keith. Another question has come in, and if we could talk a little bit more about, because we know this is a hot button issue for elections, RCV or otherwise, let's talk a little bit about the security and how the open source software can remain secure, the hash code, a little more information about how to assure users that it is safe and as free from hacking as possible.
Well, I can probably address that. One of the things that the Vistal really gets on the vendors about is security, and rightfully so. So our documentation for the users in an actual RCV election is very thorough and covers all their requirements, but the disconnected computer is probably the good place to start. That's a big issue everywhere. No network, no printer connected to a network that you're using, and no internet connection. So that does not prevent everything. But we also have malware check, virus check. We have a special login. Besides your regular login, we have a login on the file that is encrypted, so it has a second password. So to get to that RCV folder that Chris was talking about, there will be a separate password that locks that close. So if somebody comes in and has the password to the computer, they can't necessarily fool with the election. Now, it shouldn't be used for anything but an RCV election, the computer, but I know, IT departments are kind of stressed for equipment sometimes, and so we have to lock things down. So that's where we are now. If we discover any other requirements that may come down the line, we'll certainly put that in documentation, get it out to everybody.
And I just want to broadcast something Aaron actually said in the chat, Aaron Fowles, that I thought was a really clear explanation. Someone asked, how do you make sure that GitHub or that the source code you actually download is trustworthy? How do you, when you're working with open source software, ensure that it's secure? And Aaron's explanation, I'm just going to read word for word, says, GitHub, where we host our software, maintains the core software, and anybody who wants to work on it essentially has to make a copy on their own computer, protecting the original source code. So our source code is open source, anyone can see it, but if you want to make edits to it, you have to make your own copy. And that gives you both the benefit of open source, which is fresh eyes, fresh perspectives, who can find bugs or other issues in your software and help you integrate those improvements, while keeping malicious actors from actually harming the software itself.
I was just noticing a question from Wesley Huckey that, he was asking about getting this email to him. Wesley, we will have this posted on our website. And Karen, can you tell him how to know? Karen,
Rosemary.
I worked with Karen for 2.5 years. Rosemary, can you let him know how to access that when we get it posted back to the website?
I will, Frank.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We do have registration information from everyone who has registered for the webinar and ultimately attended, and we will use that list to get information to everyone on how they may see the webinar, again, if they so choose to, as well as the supporting documentation.
So you got 30 seconds.
I got 30 seconds. Okay.
We have one question that I want to make sure we cover because we got a follow-up from the same person. Catherine was wondering how we're funded. And so the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, our official name is the Election Administration Resource Center, but we operate as the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. We're entirely grant funded. Our two major funders are the Arnold Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation.
All right.
1 second.
Okay, well, real quickly, thank you all for your attendance and the great questions. I think sometimes our question and answers are as good as the webinar themselves, so we appreciate your input. And again, we will have a copy of this available to everyone at a later date. Thank you again, and have a great weekend.